Welcome to the Dodger Game channel. We're doing another Mormon Truth video. I'm going to take a look at what Mr. Mike Hughes has to say on a video he made with his opinions on Book of Mormon evidence, things that help support his faith and belief that the Book of Mormon is true. And I'm not going to agree with him on everything, but I'm going to go with he seems like a pretty sincere guy here.
I'm on a work trip again, just hanging out here in my hotel room, and I wanted to make a video real quick about evidences that point towards the truthfulness and the validity of the Book of Mormon. A lot of people know that in the LDS faith, we believe and study from the Book of Mormon as a book of Scripture. We use that alongside of the Bible, and it's something that we believe is written by ancient prophets who lived here on the American continent from about 600 BC to 400 AD, and that they recorded these revelations and these different things that happened, and that they recorded them on metallic plates, and that Joseph Smith in the 1800s, when he was called to restore the Church of Jesus Christ on the earth, he was led to this ancient record from these prophets, and that he translated it through the power of God, and that's where we get the Book of Mormon. It's called the Book of Mormon because the prophet who compiled all of these books, his name was Mormon. And so the story of the Book of Mormon and how it came forth is something that's very hard for people to believe, especially outside of our church, and that's something that I completely understand. The whole story of how it came forth is a tough pill for some people to swallow. So I wanted to make a video about some of the evidences, the scientific, physical evidences that point towards the Book of Mormon and make a very compelling case that the Book of Mormon is what it says to be, an ancient record of Scripture. First off, I want to get out of the way that in any religion, ultimately some form of faith is required. There's no way to 100% prove that the Book of Mormon is true. There's also no way to 100% prove that the Bible is true and the things that happened in the Bible really actually took place. There's a lot of evidences that you can point to, but in the end, there's no way to prove these things. Whatever religion you're in, you have to have some faith, ultimately. However, I think that evidences, physical evidences, help cultivate some ground where faith can grow. And that's definitely the case for me with the Book of Mormon. So I'm going to go through and list some of these physical evidences, and I'm going to post some links down on this video that you can click on if you want to learn more about some of these things.
Okay, Mike. All religions, you say, have to rely on faith to some degree, but you want some evidence. You want it to make some sense, but just not be provable. Well, you don't want it not to be provable. Maybe you didn't state that, but why is it that religions require faith? Is it because they can't be proven? You say they can't be proven. Well, we can prove that you can't pick up 3,000 pounds by yourself, unaided by machinery. I mean, there are plenty of things that can be proven. Where did the idea of faith come from? Where did it come from? Is it a concept that's created by people so that it gives some rationale to being unrational? A reason that it's okay to believe things that are not provable, and believe them to the point where you're willing to maybe lay down your life for something that you can't know is fact? That's an interesting concept.
So I'm just going to go through these. So first off, the whole idea of writing on metal plates. So that was something that when Joseph Smith in the early 1800s claimed to have gotten this record of metal plates and translated the Book of Mormon from it, that's something that was laughable. That nobody had ever heard of that idea of writing on metallic plates. Since Joseph Smith's time, there have been archaeological discoveries that have shown that this was actually a very common practice. Different records that are written on metallic plates have been discovered. And it's been proven that it was a well-established practice that people would do when they wanted something to last for a long period of time, last longer than something that was written on paper, because obviously paper documents only last so long.
That's a great point you bring up, Mike. Papyrus doesn't last that long, does it? The papyrus for the Book of Abraham. Let's look at this stuff. It's not looking that good, is it? And as we found, it wasn't actually written by the hand of Abraham, or in the time that Abraham is supposed to have lived, 2000 BC. It was written about closer to 200 BC, or right about, the current era. It was not written long before the Book of Mormon was beginning to be written, and it's not looking that good. Okay, maybe a little more on the faith thing. So, in the New Testament, there is the character known as Paul, the Apostle, formerly Saul of Tarsus in the story, and he defines faith as I should know how to quote this. Anyway, the hope for things sought for, the evidence of things not seen. It's not evidence, it's a belief in things not seen. So, in the Book of Mormon, where Joseph Smith supposedly translates, or someone writes, faith is not to have a perfect knowledge of all things. Wherefore, if you have faith, you hope for things which are not seen, which are true. So there's an assumption that things are true that you haven't otherwise. It says that they are true. How do you know that they're true? You don't know that they're true. So you're hoping things are true that are not seen. The whole principle of faith basically rewards people, gives praise to people, as having greater and greater faith, the more difficult something is to believe. The less sense something makes, the more faith you must have to believe it. And of course, Bruce McConkie, Elder Bruce McConkie of the Council of Quorum of the 12, taught basically that faith is a gift from God, is a reward for personal righteousness. So in other words, the more you obey the leaders of the church, the more God gives you the ability to believe the unbelievable. Think about that. That's a wonderful circular thought pattern for an organization that is basically using coercive persuasion tactics. Let's just say the Jehovah's Witnesses use the same thing, teaching a principle that you might agree to be false. And the more difficult, the more far-fetched this is, the more faith someone must have to believe it. Therefore, based on Bruce McConkie's definition of how we get faith, it just means you're more righteous if you believe something that's more unbelievable. Yeah, anyway, it works wonderfully for mind control cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses. Thank God Mormonism is true. Metal plates? I'm no expert on this, but I noticed someone in the comments stated it's been well known since the 1300s. So, somebody, it seems to be asserting that you're not correct on that point. Nevertheless, let's go on.
Joseph Smith couldn't have known about at the time, and like I said, he was mocked for that idea. Another thing was cement structures. The Book of Mormon talks throughout.
Along those same lines, Mike, I have seen in priesthood lessons where we were taught things like the word of wisdom was unheard of, such principles in Joseph Smith's day, but God was way ahead of the time in revealing to people that they shouldn't partake of certain substances or overindulge in certain substances and that sort of a thing. However, later I discovered that just 3 weeks prior to Joseph Smith having the heavens reveal these great truths to him, the Temperance Society, which had branches or chapters all over the place, just proliferating, was teaching pretty much the same doctrine. And they succeeded 3 weeks prior to this revelation to Joseph Smith, through some sort of application of political and social pressures, I imagine, to have a distillery in Kirtland shut down. Let's hope Joseph and Brigham weren't investors in the distillery. Apparently, Brigham thought this sort of thing was okay in Utah and had vineyards planted and wineries set up and tithing paid in wine. In fact, the church even got involved in creating the wine itself and had just people bring in their grapes for tithing. Evil and conspiring men in the last days getting us to drink alcohol. And Brigham Young was in the business, and Joseph tried to set up a bar in the mansion house while Emma was gone, and she came back and said, I'm leaving with the children, and if that thing isn't gone. And she got some cooperation. Maybe that's one of the reasons Joseph looked for variety in his women. Nothing like diversifying your investments, huh?
Throughout the book about the ancient inhabitants of America building cement structures. At the time, that was not known about. But since Joseph Smith's time, there have been discoveries, like I said, with the golden plates. The same thing with cement structures. There have been discoveries that show that ancient inhabitants of America did, in fact, use cement to build structures. Another thing is olive tree cultivation. There's a chapter in the Book of Mormon that talks extensively about the way that you raise, grow, graft trees, and cultivate olive trees. And experts have gone through and said that yes, this is very accurately how it's done. So Joseph Smith, he was born in New York. He had a 3rd grade level education. He had never worked with olive trees. He had never been taught how to work with olive trees. And there's just no way that he could have known all of these intricate details about the cultivation of olive trees. Yet it's found in the Book of Mormon, which to me points towards the fact that it was actually written by someone who knew about olive trees. And we believe that it was written by an ancient prophet who was familiar with that because he had roots in the Middle East. And so, at which, obviously we know in the Middle East, olive tree cultivation is a common practice.
Okay, Mike. Olive trees. This is where you have to go to get faith. The Book of Mormon is true. Olive trees. Okay, well, you've got some assumptions there. Your assumption seems to be that Joseph Smith himself would have had to have direct knowledge about olive tree cultivation in order to put it in the Book of Mormon. As I recall, Joseph Smith was not alone when the Book of Mormon was being penned. He had a scribe. He had various scribes. His cousin Oliver, I believe, was a school teacher. He also became an attorney. Sidney Rigdon seems to have had ability to have visited with Joseph Smith, and there are various thoughts of what he might have helped supply, whether people talk about the Spalding manuscript or Rosicrucian monks who might have had esoteric knowledge that seemed to go into the Book of Mormon and Book of Moses, residing near Sidney Rigdon. There's no reason to tell us that Joseph Smith was limited to his own knowledge. You say he had a 3rd grade education. So after he was 8 years old or so, or whenever he attained 3rd grade education, he never learned anything because he wasn't in a public or private school? He didn't learn anything until he was 23 years old, Mike? Think about it. Did he not live in Palmyra? Was there not a library there with all sorts of resources? And what resources did Oliver Cowdery have? What resources did Martin Harris have? Who knows? What knowledge did Emma have? Restricting this to what you think Joseph Smith might have known by the end of 3rd grade is beyond. You're functioning way outside of any kind of logical bounds when you make those assertions, Mike. I'm sure he learned something outside of the 3rd grade classroom by the time he was 23, or had access to people or books that contained valuable information. And who knows what sources he might have used or might have gone into the creating of the Book of Mormon. There's no reason for us to say that Joseph Smith necessarily, dictated every word that went into it, just because of the story saying those things.
Another thing that I'll talk briefly about, it's kind of hard to explain, so I'll post a link about it, is the Hebraic form of writing, which is called chiasmus. So we believe that the Book of Mormon was originally written in an ancient form of Hebrew and Reformed Egyptian. And Joseph Smith, through the power of God, translated it from that language to English. And so chiasmus is very common in Hebraic writing. It's a form of poetry. And it basically, I'll just explain it briefly, it's where you start with one idea, move to the middle, repeat the middle, and then end with the idea you started on. So an example would be, Old King Cole was a merry old soul, and a merry old soul was he. So you start with Old King Cole, move to merry old soul, repeat merry old soul, and then end with the subject. Old King Cole. And so that's something that in Hebrew is very common. You'll look at chapters where they'll start with one thing, move to the middle, move out the opposite way they came, and end on what they started with. That form of writing is found throughout the Book of Mormon in multiple places, whether it's clusters of verses or whole chapters, or sometimes even entire books of Scripture in the Book of Mormon. Chiasmus is just very common. Experts have gone through and said there's no way that this is a coincidence. Multiple times chiasmus is found. So either it was written, the Book of Mormon was written by someone who made it up, who knew a lot about the Hebraic form of writing, or it was written by these prophets who wrote and spoke in Hebrew and Reformed Egyptian. Joseph Smith, of course, there's no way that he could have known about that Hebraic form of writing with his limited education, the young age. He was around 20 when he translated the Book of Mormon. There's just no way that he could have known about it. And this is a good time for me to say that I am absolutely 100% convinced that Joseph Smith didn't make up the Book of Mormon. And a lot of people who try to disprove the Book of Mormon have conceded that fact as well. There's no way that he could have done it. So what a lot of people have said is that, okay, someone else made it up and used Joseph Smith as a mouthpiece, as a spokesperson. To me, that idea is just very hard to believe, and I'll tell you why. Joseph Smith developed such a following. He developed this church. People are following him. You could say he gained this fame or notoriety. So if that happened, why didn't this person who actually made it up come forth? Why didn't someone come forth and try to capitalize on that? A lot of people have identified a select few people who would have had the knowledge or the education to even have tried to write what the Book of Mormon is. And when you look at each one of these people, they never came forth, never claimed anything. They had very limited interaction with Joseph Smith. It's just highly unlikely to me. So I think that's something that's very interesting to consider. So there's no way that Joseph Smith could have written it. It's hard for me.
Okay, Mike. Notoriety. Was it all about notoriety? It may have been about notoriety for Joseph Smith, but not necessarily everyone wants notoriety for things that they're revealing. There are things that are revealed about secret combinations, basically mimicking illuminated Freemasonry. Okay, so the whole Rosicrucian monks having this knowledge might make sense to giving knowledge to Joseph Smith. Who knows where these things came from? However, some of your assertions just aren't making a great deal of sense to me at all. Hebraic writings, chiasmus, you say he knew a lot about it. You just explained it in about 10 seconds. Okay? Repeating things in a certain way, just like it's in the Bible. Here's maybe an example of what I might think of something like that. The prophets hath he hidden, and the seers hath he covered. I mean, it's all throughout the Bible. How about pride goeth before the fall, and a haughty look before destruction? Or, it is better to obey than to sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. I mean, those are Hebraic writings. If you take a look around, you might find that there are chiasmus existing in all sorts of non-Hebraic writings. Somebody mentioned Dr. Seuss. Hey, well, here's some more thoughts on that. There's a guy named Chris Johnson who's a returned missionary. And I think he's on something like ex-Mormon whatever convention or something, and he did a whole presentation on certain things, including that, and they, using computer programs to analyze hundreds of thousands of books, and tons of them have more chiasmus in the Book of Mormon that have nothing to do with anything Hebraic. So you don't have to understand a great deal to use a literary form. Not only that, what does Hebrew have to do with the Book of Mormon, Mike? It says they spoke Reformed Egyptian. So you're telling me that they somehow used Hebraic literary forms in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and then that came back into Hebraic writing forms when translated to English. That's requiring an awful lot of what you call faith. That's a stretch. That's more of a stretch than what you're saying by a long shot, in my opinion. Okay, onward we go.
To believe that someone else wrote it and used it because they never came forth. Joseph Smith, in his private and public conversations, never told anyone that he had written it or that someone else had given it to him. Even the closest family members, his wife, his parents, siblings, he never told anyone anything that would hint towards the idea that he made it up or that someone else made it up and gave it to him.
Okay, Mike. Now, people like to talk about how quickly Joseph Smith supposedly translated the Book of Mormon. I've seen things that say 90 days. I've seen 65 days. I think somebody else said less than that. But it seems like his powers of translation really slowed down when he got into the Book of Abraham. If he can produce, 6 pages a day or so to do the 500 and some odd pages in 90 days or so, with the Book of Mormon, looking at his brown rock in his hat, or if you choose to believe he was using magic glasses, described in Ether chapter 3, and basically by Joseph Smith, the 2 clear stones and a silver bow, and that he was peering at the plates, even Oliver Cowdery, when he started saying the words Urim and Thummim, said his face was in the hat, not looking at the plates. But, whether it's a crystal ball, seer stone, or magic glasses, whatever the occult means or magical means of channeling the Book of Mormon that were basically originally told in the writings of people like David Whitmer and Emma. The fact is that he was putting out 6 pages a day or so. The Book of Abraham took him 7 years to do, 2 or 3 days' work. Why is that? Did he have the seer stone, in for repairs? I mean, come on. What happened to his ability? They paid $2,400, which was a lot of money in those days, Mike. Enough to buy probably maybe up to 300 acres of land in Kirtland, at least when it was $7 an acre. We won't talk about the Kirtland wannabe bank when they got into land speculation as the price rose to $47 an acre or so in some areas there. They could have bought a lot of land with that money, but they buy some mummies and some papyri, and he says it's got the writings from the hand of Abraham directly. He also says it contained writings of Joseph the Patriarch. Now, he discovers this very quickly, but he can't seem to translate them for 7 years from Abraham and never from Joseph, after huge amounts of money were put in to buying these things. Now, after the Book of Abraham papyri copies and facsimiles have proven to be completely false translations, the Church in its Gospel Topics essay now basically says, well, they weren't really written by Abraham, but they inspired Joseph to have a revelation about Abraham. So he just paid $2,400 of someone else's money to get an inspiration. Good thing the Doctrine and Covenants, other revelations and so forth, were $2,400 a pop. I don't think that would have worked too well. Anyway, the whole thing about the hand of Abraham, well, I guess they're saying that that wasn't true. Kind of just like they're not saying that the seed of Lehi are the primary ancestors of the American Indians anymore, are they, Mike? So it took them 7 years, and there's all kinds of false stuff in the Book of Abraham. I've got a video called Prove All Things, and another one specifically just on Abraham. Anyway, it mentions Abraham more, but maybe both of them, just the latter one, the Prove All Things, really go through some of these things, and there's so many things that are completely false data, false facts, anachronisms, linguistic anachronisms, historical anachronisms, false definition of words, using words that didn't exist at the time. All sorts of things in that Book of Abraham, and science that's pretty bizarre. The sun gets its light from Kolob. That's a good one, but the other things are provably false, Mike. Just like things in the Book of Mormon contradict things in the Doctrine and Covenants directly. Jesus contradicts himself and the Book of Moses. So, it's not looking good here for the Book of Mormon so far, Mike.
So that's something that's interesting to me. So I'll also list a few more of these evidences. There's a lot more, but I don't want to take up too much time. One that a lot of people don't know about outside the church is that they're...
You don't want to take up too much time, so I assume that you were giving us your best ones first.
actually 11 witnesses who were allowed to see and feel and touch the metal plates that Joseph Smith was given and that he translated the Book of Mormon from. These people wrote down their testimonials. They were allowed, like I said, to touch it, to go through it, to study it. It's interesting to me that some of these people actually ended up leaving the church. They became disaffected or offended by something that was said, and they ended up leaving the church. But even those people who leave to the church never denied having seen the metallic plates, the golden plates, as we call them, because the metal that the Book of Mormon was written on was a golden material. And so that's why you'll oftentimes hear it referred to as the golden plates. But even these people who left the church to their deathbed were challenged, and they always admitted, even up till the time that they died, that yes, they had seen these plates. There's something there. Obviously, that's not 100% proof that the Book of Mormon is true. Someone could always make up some plates, but when you take all of these evidences and you put them together, it's like a lot of small sticks being put together. It's hard to break. It makes a very compelling case for the Book of Mormon.
So you've got 11 guys that say they touched the Book of Mormon, you say. The plates, the golden plates that you're kind of backpedaling on and just calling them metallic, that they looked like gold. Maybe because you're concerned about them actually not being gold. Well, let's not forget that Joseph Smith says that there was an issue about him being mistrusted by the angel or God in consequence of his indigent circumstances, that he would use the plates to get rich. That wouldn't happen unless they really were gold, Mike, and had actual metallic value. Okay, next. So, you say these guys all wrote their testimonies? Well, where are those testimonies, Mike? Because I haven't seen them. There's one generic testimony, and there's one handwriting. They're apparently supposedly signed by only one person signing the names is what I've read. Now I'm no handwriting expert, so I'm just throwing that one out there. But what I will say is that it's one generic testimony, not 11 different people writing testimonies that I've seen. Additionally, the whole premise is false there. Some of them left the church, and so they're supposed to say, oh, by the way, in addition to me feeling that Joseph Smith is a false prophet or fallen prophet or adulterer or whatever, I'd just like to say that I was lying the whole time and ruined my own reputation when there's no motivation for me to do so, for me to say that I was lying about it. Why would they destroy their own reputations, Mike? They've already said that Joseph Smith's an adulterer or whatever, condemned him as a fallen prophet. They don't need to destroy their own reputations. That's one of the most ridiculous defenses that I've ever heard. Now, I don't think that you made it up yourself. Sounds like, something that maybe might have been in Nibley's Book of Mormon challenge. Who knows? Greg Trimble uses the same thing in his rather ridiculous attempt to do the same thing here that you're doing, or to recycle Nibley's Book of Mormon challenge. Some of these things are just ridiculous that you use as a premise, and they're not based on any real logical thought. In fact, they're self-destructive.
Is the study of word prints. So word prints are very interesting to me. So just like we each have our own unique set of fingerprints, we each have a very unique word print. So what a word print is when you look at something that someone has written, whether it's a book or documents or a report or they've written in their journal or something, we each have a very unique word print. It's in the way that we conjugate verbs and the way that we form sentences. And when you study someone's writing, experts can really identify their word print. This is something that's been used in the FBI and the CIA to identify criminals who left notes behind at crime scenes, and they'll take that and they'll study the word print, compare it with other things that the suspected criminal has written, and that's one way that they will prove that the criminal committed the crime. So experts went through the Book of Mormon, they read through it, they read through Joseph Smith's writings, his personal writings, and they compared the word prints. As you might have guessed, they don't match. Joseph Smith's word prints are found nowhere in the Book of Mormon. And in fact, they went through and studied the word prints of the various prophets throughout the Book of Mormon and found unique word prints that don't match each other. So that's something that's very interesting to me. There's a few more forms of Hebraic writing that is found throughout the Book of Mormon. I just wanted to give a brief example. It's things that when you say it in English, it sounds kind of funny to us, but when you say it in Hebrew, it's very common. So just one brief example is in the book of 1 Nephi, chapter 13. It's on page 24 of the Book of Mormon. It's a verse, and this is Nephi, the prophet Nephi, recording a vision that he had. It says, "And I also saw gold, and silver, and silks, and scarlets, and fine twined linen, and all manner of precious clothing." That sounds very weird to us to put an "and" in between each noun, but in Hebrew, that is the acceptable form of doing it, and that's how it's done. You put an "and" in between each noun. We in English would just, and in the 1800s would just say, "And I also saw gold, silver, silks, scarlets, and fine twined linen." But there's an "and" in between each one, and that's very consistent with Hebrew. Would Joseph Smith have known that? Absolutely not.
Mike, let's be frank here. I'm not really aware of any Hebraic roots that I have. I have not necessarily studied Hebrew other than reading the Bible and so forth and the Book of Mormon. But I have many times said and between various other words and. That doesn't make me Hebraic. Once again, what does Hebrew have to do with the Book of Mormon, Mike? It's supposed to come from Egyptian hieroglyphs. How do you get Hebraic writing forms from a phonetic alphabet into hieroglyphs and then back out and into English? And you say it doesn't make sense in English, but it came from Hebrew, but they weren't supposedly writing in Hebrew, so you're kind of contradicting your whole premise there. Okay. And so anyway, at the beginning of the Book of Mormon, he said our knowledge consisted, the learning of the Hebrews and the language of the Egyptians. It doesn't even say they spoke Hebrew. Well, of course, if they really existed, they should speak Hebrew. Why they'd speak Egyptian and write in Egyptian, I really don't know. But he talks about using the language of the Egyptians there. Now you talk about there were multiple contributors to the text of the Book of Mormon. So what? So what, Mike? There are multiple contributors to Genesis, and supposedly, or at least experts, scholars. You don't bother to name your experts, by the way, I noticed, but scholars of the Bible seem to notice that probably at least 3 guys were writing in Genesis, and it's obvious it wasn't written by anybody in the time Moses was supposed to have lived in, by all the anachronisms. Anyhow, let's not get into that too deeply. You can try reading The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, and he'll point out those things for you, and you can just go check in your own scriptures and see how ridiculous the Bible is. So, there were multiple contributors. Maybe these Rosicrucian monks had a number of authors of various texts that went into the Book of Mormon. I don't know, but what I think I do know is that it's not incumbent upon anyone to prove where everything came from in order for it not to be a default assumption that Joseph Smith gained it from the Hebrew God. Even if he was channeling from his brown rock or magic glasses, it doesn't mean it was the Hebrew God who gave him the information. And there does seem to be some things that seem to be indicative of Joseph Smith when he goes on and on about certain things and repeats himself in a way that is difficult to imagine anyone doing, and then repeats the same form of writing, going on and on about things and in a repetitive manner in the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. For instance, the language used when he's prophesying about himself in Genesis chapter 50.
And that's another evidence that points towards the validity. So these are just a few things. Another one that I think is very significant is the fact that Joseph Smith died, like I said, having never told anyone that it was a fake. And even in the last hours of his death, he and his brother quoted verses from the Book of Mormon for comfort. They both felt that they were going to die soon. They had some knowledge that people were going to come and try to kill them, and they needed comfort, and they quoted verses from the Book of Mormon for comfort to each other. I think that's interesting. If you were about to die, would you quote from something that you had made up or that you knew was false for comfort? I don't think so. And till the very end, he always maintained that he believed that the Book of Mormon was true. And he stuck to his story that it had been given to him by God, and that through the power of God he had translated it. So,
Mike, why would the guy try to destroy his own reputation? He had enough problems. He didn't need to say, yeah, I faked this whole thing. Seriously. And did he say those things? Who knows? I mean, if Dr. Richards, or John Taylor attested to that, wasn't it to their own advantage to continue the legacy of Joseph Smith being a prophet of God? I mean, they needed the church to be successful for them to maintain their grip on power. So there's no who knows what they said. Do you believe that because you read it? Do you believe that because Jeffrey Holland insists on it when he says they died because they wouldn't deny the Book of Mormon? They died because they were hated by various individuals, possibly for revealing Masonic secrets in the temple ordinances, possibly for stealing other men's wives. He was in trouble because he was doing things that were wrong, like having the printing press destroyed because they let out the fact that there was a section 132 that was endorsing non-monogamous relationships, which Joseph Smith evidently wanted to keep secret and which he denied existed. And well, when William Law and friends printed that, Joseph Smith had their printing press destroyed. Violation of the First Amendment, in my opinion, as far as the ability for people to have freedom of the press. Not to mention it was their property. I mean, if he wants to try to sue them for libel, give it your best shot, Joseph, but don't cause a riot and have their property destroyed. That's called criminal behavior, Mike. Okay? Not to mention adultery and treason were issues that were of great concern at that point, him being anointed king through the Council of 50. Ironically, the Book of Mormon describes a secret combination resembling illuminated Freemasonry, whose goal was to destroy a representative government and install kings, whereas the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, organized, or at least basically reorganized or inaugurated through Masonic principles and Rosicrucian and Templar principles possibly, May 1st, 1776, on a satanic holiday known as Beltane. Well, what were they wanting to do? The exact opposite. Destroy the monarchy and install a government that they could more easily control, which would be one that appears to be representative. Amazing. And then Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon get the Danites going, and then the Council of 50. Oath-bound secret societies resembling those that were condemned by the Book of Mormon, saying, "The Lord worketh not in secret combinations." But they set up two, in defiance of the existing law of the land, which apparently, in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord endorses the Constitution and said he raised up wise men to create it. And yet Joseph Smith is trying to undermine it with the Council of 50, setting up the kingdom of God under him.
So these are just a few things that I think are very important. Like I said, you can't 100% prove that the Book of Mormon is true. It ultimately comes down to faith. You need to read through the Book of Mormon like you would with the Bible or with anything else, and you need to pay attention to your feelings, and then you need to pray and ask for God's Spirit to help confirm to you that it's true. I've done that. I know that it's true. There's another evidence for me is there's been so many times where I've been going through the Book of Mormon, and I've been reading it, and I've thought, that principle that I just read is so deep and so profound and so life-changing for me that there's no way that a man could have just written it, especially a man who's intending to deceive. It would have to be written by someone who's inspired by God, and it's divinely inspired. So if you've never gone through the Book of Mormon, I would encourage you to pick it up, to read through it with an open mind, and just see how it can bless your life, because it's really blessed mine. I hope that's interesting or helpful to some people. If you have any comments, please leave them below. Thanks.
Mike, thanks for your sincerity. I really think you seem like a sincere and a nice guy. I have to say, I have read the Book of Mormon, Mike, and I have also read much of the Bible. There's probably a few things in the Old Testament that I've missed, especially in Proverbs or Psalms or the Song of Solomon. Now, what I will say is that in the New Testament, and I'm sure you attest to believe it, especially if it's not contradicted by the Joseph Smith translation or something of that nature, and we've got the words of Paul saying, "Prove all things, hold fast to that which is true." Now, I have a video that I've done that basically is based on that, prove all things, proving the Scriptures. Now, actually, in the Doctrine and Covenants, I believe in section 20, the Lord, supposedly, through Joseph Smith, declares certain things. He declares that the Book of Mormon contains the fullness of the gospel. That's a good one. We can get into that. And he says that it comes forth that it proves the validity of the Bible, in so many words, or the truths that are in the Bible. It says it establishes and proves the Bible and its truth. Now, I've taken a look at those things. In the Book of Mormon, the LDS scriptures are filled with contradiction. They contradict each other, and in some cases, themselves. And the Book of Mormon even has contradictions in the next verse, at least in one case. It's got some stuff that's so ridiculous, Mike, it's beyond belief. Now, the biggest contradictions seem to be between the Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses, and the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. So, when we prove all things, if we take these things as the Word of God and look at them, we see stark contradictions. We see the Book of Mormon teaching in Jacob that the actions of David and Solomon were abominations, that they were whoredom when they had multiple women in their lives, concubines. If you want to call them wives, you can stretch it to that. The fact is that it says, "I, the Lord, delight in the chastity of women, and whoredoms are an abomination to me." He specifically condemns the actions of David and Solomon. Then in section 132, the Doctrine and Covenants, David and Solomon are justified. In fact, David is specifically said to have had his wives given him by the prophet Nathan. Read the accounts. The exact same two people doing the exact same things are completely described differently in the way that so-called Lord sees them. They're adulterous, whoredoms, abominations, wickedness. In the Book of Mormon, they are condoned by the Lord and given by his prophet Nathan to David, and only sinned in the Bathsheba-Uriah thing there. Absolute contradiction, Mike. Sorry about that one. Also, in the Book of Moses, chapter 7, we have the Lord visiting face-to-face with Enoch. Now, who the Lord is very confusing, too, because we see he speaks as God the Father, and then he starts talking like he's Jesus later. Now, this is awfully long before what happens with the brother of Jared, as is the occasion where the Lord visits these same people he would have been living with for the last 240 years in Zion, down in Davies County, Missouri, at Adam-on-Diamond. He's visiting Adam and all the patriarchs named through Methuselah and all the other righteous descendants of Adam. And then in 107 verse 54, the Lord appears. He's already been hanging out with him in Zion, all the righteous people anyway, for the last 240 years, Mike. But this is a long, long time before the flood, supposedly. And then after the flood, about 150 years or so, on our timeline, we've got the Jaredites about to leave Babylon. And what happens? The Lord appears to the brother of Jared, tells him he's Jesus Christ, then he's the Father and the Son. And then he tells him, "You're the first guy to ever see me. The only reason you saw me is because you've got more faith than anyone's ever had. No one's ever had sufficient faith. No one's ever seen me but you." Apparently, 1100 years ago, before then, when he was talking with Enoch, he was lying. Or he's lying to the brother of Jared. Somebody's lying here, and it all came through Joseph Smith, Mike. You've got a problem there. You might want to take a look at those. Or you can watch my videos on it that do the page turning for you, and you can just see it there. I've got a Ether Chapter 3 video. I've got Jesus Proves the Scriptures. I've got Prove All Things. And I've got the Truthfulness of the Scriptures videos. And I'll link some of those to you. All of them contain this particular information. Absolute contradiction. Jesus lies in the LDS scriptures. It's a problem, Mike. It's a big problem. 2nd Nephi chapter 5 is such a good one in various ways, but verses 15 and 16, they're pretty close to a pretty strong contradiction. Now he says that they've got all sorts of they got precious ores. He says they had precious ores after he names that they have gold and silver in abundance. I don't know what the precious ores were that were in addition to gold and silver, or why it's worded that way. But the next verse, they're building the temple like the Temple of Solomon, but unfortunately they don't have any precious things to put in it. So it can't be like the Temple of Solomon. They lost all their precious things in the previous verse, apparently. Or you've got Abinadi, who was in disguise, comes in disguise because he's been hiding out for 2 years after King Noah wanted to have him wasted. So he comes in disguise and says, "The Lord said unto me, Abinadi, Abinadi." He says this to the people while he's in disguise. He reveals that he is Abinadi, telling them that he's Abinadi when he's in disguise, trying to not show that he's Abinadi. I don't know, that's just Book of Mormon comedy. Now, just a little bit ago, I mentioned that I believe it's section 20 in the Doctrine and Covenants, where it is supposedly the Lord speaking through Joseph Smith, the prophet, and he says that the Book of Mormon contains the fullness of the gospel. Let's also mention at this time that in 1 Nephi chapter 13, I believe it is, it says that before the plain and precious things, the many plain and precious things are taken out of the gospel of the Lamb by that great and abominable church of the devil, that these scriptures also contain the fullness of the gospel. So we're looking at a little picture here of Mormon Next Door Girl, and I did a video about a video that she did, or at least discussing what Mormons believe about the plan of salvation, or what happens after mortal life. And you know, the fullness of the gospel of Mormon salvation, or the Mormon theology and of the plan of salvation, is not found in the Book of Mormon, Mike. As a matter of fact, and I don't see it restored in the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible too much either. The things that are more unique to the LDS theology with the plan of salvation, I don't know if they're unique, maybe they're similar to some other preachings, like from Emanuel Swedenborg, a spiritualist, but they don't come from the Book of Mormon or the Bible, really, Mike. The doctrine of the premortal existence, I mean, if you there's a couple of verses in the Bible that are used in the missionary lessons, like the sons of God singing for joy in Job, or who sinned, this man or his parents, you know. But most of that comes from, well, we've got the Book of Abraham, and then we've got the sections in the Doctrine and Covenants, especially section 76 with the, 3 degrees of glory, and then section 132 we've got the, 3 divisions of glory within the celestial kingdom. We've got the premortal existence. We've got eternal marriage. We've got celestial marriage involving multiple wives with one man. And they're not part of any LDS plan of salvation in those other 2 books that I can see. Sometimes people in the church try to justify polygamy by talking about Abraham. And the Book of Mormon's only mention of anything like polygamy, of course, is the condemnation of it as absolute wickedness and whoredom, except for the one sentence of, "If I, the Lord, want them to raise up seed unto me," or something of that nature, which evidently Joseph Smith doesn't appear to have given us much evidence that he was raising up seed. So by additional women in his life. Well, the fullness of the gospel is contained not in the Book of Mormon, but in the Doctrine and Covenants, so far as the LDS theology is concerned, and then the Book of Abraham probably contributes heavily to it. The Book of Mormon basically is a Christian book. It is a book that talks about Christian doctrines popular at the time of Joseph Smith, and other subjects popular at his time, such as Freemasonry. or the suggestion that the American Indians just happen to be a lost tribe of Israel, and of course the handy-dandy solution to how they got darker skin than your average Jew, when they were cursed in 2 Nephi chapter 5 with a skin of blackness for their gross wickedness, in order to separate them from the righteous Nephites, their white and delightsome brethren. Of course, this curse from God, well, with the skin of blackness, is now disavowed by the brethren officially in the Gospel Topics essay on race and priesthood, where it states that they disavow the theories formerly advanced that black skin, or a skin of blackness, is a sign of divine disfavor or a curse from God. Directly opposite of what the Book of Mormon teaches on this subject. But that's another video. And I've got links for them, Mike. There's a lot you can learn. The brethren just keep contradicting each other when we look back in time. Whether it's LDS Scripture or whether it's conference talks from Brigham Young, they're just false theories now. Well, it's been good, Mike. There's so much more, Mike, but give a look at my videos. They get into it in detail, and maybe you can comment on them and tell me that I've got it right or got it wrong, and show me where. I wish you all the best. You seem like a really great guy. I just don't think that the facts seem to support what you're saying. This has been a Mormon Truth video on the Dodger Game channel. Remember to like, subscribe, and get into the channel. Just left the subscription button there. Thanks for your comments as well.